Hey, what's up everyone? Luke here, and today I just want to talk about hair mineral analysis and how it compares to other tests that doctors like to use. Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the tests that doctors like to use, things like blood tests, saliva tests, urine tests. These are all tests that doctors like to use. And while they can be useful to a certain extent, and they can tell you certain things about the body, and they can be useful depending on how they're applied, it's important that we realize certain things and we realize that the limitations that are, certain limitations that go along with these tests that doctors like to use. So Dr. Eck loved to talk about how blood is maintained at expense of the tissues. What I mean by that is that the blood has a very specific range of certain things that have to be maintained in order for you to even function at all. For example, pH, oxygen levels in the blood, calcium levels, another important one. And your body will maintain this at the expense of the tissues. And what that means is that your body will use any means necessary in order for your blood to maintain that certain range of pH and other things. So for example, calcium. What happens in your blood is that it needs to maintain a certain calcium level. And if you're not digesting, if you're not getting enough calcium, your body has to have calcium. So what it does is it'll actually leach some calcium from your bones. And so you'll be getting bone loss, but your body has to make that sacrifice in order for your blood to have that calcium level. And this happens with numerous things in the blood. So a lot of times we look for things in the blood and then they don't show up. And the reason that they don't show up is because the body is using all of its different resources to maintain the blood. That's why blood tests a lot of times don't, people get blood tests and then the doctor doesn't know why they have all these problems. They tell them I'm tired all the time, or they have chronic fatigue syndrome, I can't wake up in the morning, all these different symptoms. And then they take a blood test and the doctor's like, well, your blood came back fine, so we don't really know. It's because people don't realize the body has to maintain the blood at any cost up until death. A lot of times what will happen is finally a blood test will come back a certain way, right before someone dies, because the body finally exhausts all of its resources to maintain the blood. And their body will do this at any expense, bone, liver, minerals that are anywhere else in the body, There's certain mechanisms that the body just has to have, okay? The blood has to be maintained because it's in contact with every cell in your body, okay? And then in order for these cells to work properly and for them to be oxygenated and all these things, the blood has to be maintained. And this is true also for saliva and urine tests. And one thing that people also don't realize is that it's only an immediate thing, okay? When you take a blood test, it only represents the body in the exact state when you took the blood. Now, for example, when you take a hair test, it's not the exact state of when you took the hair test, because you're taking enough hair where it's more like a 3-month sample. So it's an average over 3 months of the state that your body's in. It's a 3-month average of your thyroid health, of your adrenal health, your digestive health, all these different things, okay? So it's much more useful to have a snapshot of a 3-month period as opposed to an instant snapshot. That's very important to realize. And the reason why it's so important is because your body, for example, the oxidation rate. One thing you can calculate from the hair test is your oxidation rate. The oxidation rate is like the tune of your engine. If it's rev too fast would be fast oxidation, and rev too slow would be slow oxidation. And what happens, for example, like when you exercise, if you took the oxidation rate when you're doing some like sprinting or something like that, your adrenals would be activated and all these things, and your oxidation rate would be fast. It'd be faster than normal because you're doing exercise. Whereas when you're at your resting heart rate, you'd be more in a slow oxidation. So it's important to have that 3-month sample so that you know what the average oxidation rate is. The average stress that's happening to someone's body over a 3-month period. So that's why hair analysis is so useful. It's also useful because it's much more preventive. A lot of times things show up in the hair that don't typically show up for a long time, like I said, in the blood. Things will show up in the blood for years just because your body has to maintain it. But with the hair, you can catch things much earlier. It's much more preventative, so that you can prevent things like diabetes. You can prevent being tired. You can prevent all these things from happening in the first place. So that's a couple of reasons why it's so good. Now also cost. The lab that we like to use is ARL. in analytical research laboratories, and they cost $70. Okay, now if you think of how much a doctor's visit, especially if you don't have insurance, you know, these things ratchet up. I know people that do, you know, crazy tests, and not just blood tests, but other kinds of tests. You know, like they do X-rays and you know, they do CAT scans and all these things, and these things, you know, are super expensive. And unless you have good health insurance, these things can really add up. Whereas a hair test, it's $70, and you only have to get it done every 3 months. So it not only is it better in all these ways, it's actually much cheaper. It's also very accurate. You know, the devices that they use nowadays, these I think they're called spectrometers. You know, they're amazing devices, and they can get, you know, it's parts per million. It's amazing. Now let's talk about the lab we like to use. The lab that we specifically use is analytical research laboratories. We like to use this laboratory first of all because there's only a couple labs that don't wash the hair, and what I mean by that is that most laboratories actually wash the hair like 30-50 times with solvents, and they use like really harsh like alcohol solvents, and they wash the hair like, you know, multiple times. And then what happens is you wash away a lot of the minerals, especially the water soluble ones, and then the readings aren't nearly as accurate. Also, ARL Labs was, you know, is pioneered by Dr. Eck. Dr. Eck actually created this laboratory, and his children actually are a huge part of running it today. And he created it in mind with nutritional balancing science, because if you remember, Dr. Eck also created this science. And, you know, he created a computer program that helps us a lot, because the computer program actually will read the hair and then it'll prescribe certain things. We don't use completely the program the computer uses, but it is a helpful tool, and then we usually modify it afterwards because the computer hasn't been updated for a while, and it'll be there's certain modifications that we use nowadays that are, you know, help people progress faster. And so the director of the lab is, you know, is very professional. They're a very professional lab. They don't charge much. They also do free retesting if any of the results are way out of whack. And you know, Dr. Eck, you know, he's the one that pioneered these methods. He's the one that created it, and he was, you know, very concerned with professionalism and, you know, providing access to hair mineral analysis for everyone. And it's very. So remember, it's you can't use just any lab, especially nutritional balancing science. Okay, they can't wash the hair. And another reason that we use analytical research labs is because the way the graphs are designed are actually easier to look at and to notice the patterns in the first place. They also calculate the oxidation rate for you, and certain ratios are listed from the computer. So anyways, that's all for today. We talked about why hair analysis, why we use it so much, how it compares to blood tests. So one thing what we should take away from this is that your body regulates blood and other things at expense of the tissue. So things will not show up in blood that will show up in the hair analysis. Also, it's cheaper, it's safer, it's less intrusive, and it's more effective, okay? And I'll talk to you guys later.